Now, how with the generative AI and ChatGPT and how it's impacting your as an agency business? Because now people started thinking a layman or early, oh, okay, I can create a content, marketing content from the ChatGPT or a Bard, and I'm good at. So, what you're seeing over the last 3 4 months?
For sure. The short answer is things have been fascinating since the accessibility of all these different tools. I think the biggest impact that we're seeing within our organization is that, again, I think of agencies as a collection of operating procedures that we've
Hmm.
systemized and repeated over and over again. And so trying to
Hmm.
find ways to use tools like ChatGPT or whatever and applying it to our organization, I think
Hmm.
very broadly speaking, I think it reduces the cost so that we're either more efficient to do more with less, or
Hmm.
we're able to do the same things that we're previously doing, but faster. And we do see that, and we do actively encourage our team members
Hmm.
to experiment to do those type of things. And
Hmm.
so where I think that impacts our organization and our business is that a lot of the things that we used to be able to do.
Welcome to the OTech Talks podcast, where it's all about working on technologies. You will hear the latest tech information, and your host, Kashif Manzoor, brings together product overviews, how-tos, best practices, tips and tricks, and troubleshooting techniques.
Welcome to Open Tech Talks podcast. And today we have a guest speaker, John Chan, co-founder of 2X Agency, and which they're claiming 2X Growth Agency. So now let's hear today how they are making sure that you will get a growth in your business. So welcome, John, to the
Love to,
show. If you can
love to,
introduce
and
to the
thank you for having me.
audiences. Thank you. Okay,
Yeah.
so
So my name is John. I run a growth agency based in Vancouver, Canada, and we primarily work with e-commerce and software companies that have found product market fit, and we help them grow through paid acquisition campaigns. We help them with email marketing, and we help them with direct response landing pages. And so we're full stack marketers through and through.
okay, and how you landed to this business? Well, now I can
For
say
sure.
because it must be you must
Yeah.
be working somewhere and all that.
Yeah, for sure. So we've been in the industry for at least this point for me, it's about 18 years now. So I personally come from a background of being a generalist. I started my career in 2006 as a designer, as a UX designer, because I studied fine arts and design, and eventually I actually dropped out to start my own freelancing business. But a lot of the career progression started from looking at sort of the next sense of area that I think the organization that I was working with needed. And so when I first started coding, I realized that there was people on the other side, and it helped me sort of expose me to the idea of user research and so on. And so that eventually led itself to analytics, because I wanted to measure and understand how the things that I was doing impacted businesses and technologies. And that eventually, when I understood that the impact for user experience was had the flip side, the led with product, that led to a foray of doing uh, software development and writing apps. Um, and then when and so this was probably between 2006 to 2011 or so as a UX designer, and then from 2011 to about 2016 or so, I was working as a software developer and mostly self-taught. And I learned by joining a coding boot camp as a TA, that type of
Hmm.
thing. And when I ran before the agency, my co-founder and I, who's also my wife, we were building a tech product, and we got user traction. We had about 30,000 weekly active users, but eventually we hit a breaking point where we realized that we felt like, at least I should say, that we didn't understand user acquisition. And then that led us into the current form of the business, where we started out by interacting and meeting with other growth sort of stage products, understanding how they worked and supporting them, to eventually being consultants ourselves and doing this type of work. And so between 2006 is when we first started the agency, starting as a design consultancy, to about 2019 or so, we became a paid media agency. And now 2023, we're basically a team of 6 and a bunch of freelancers and contractors working with 7, 8-figure brands to help them with their growth campaigns. And that's kind of how we became full stack marketers, starting as designers, technologists, and software developers to media buyers.
Oh, exciting, very interesting journey. And the key point which I can pick it, that building a product as a technologist and then pivoting from that, because eventually someone thinking about like me, that okay, I'm building a product, then it's mean my focus is more on to keep building it and how to sell and grow that product. Okay, and then you learn from that experience how to sell that product, and then you pivoted to this as a growth agency and help other people to sell it. Very good, actually.
Yeah,
Amazing.
100%. 100%. And so the common thread, I would say, is that back then we just solved for the next problem that we were running into in our careers, in our product, in our business, and it just kind of led to the next set of skills. And then looking back, I didn't know this at the time, but one of the core strengths that I realized that I eventually had was that I was very good at learning new skills and being a professional about it, fairly quickly. And then that kind of became sort of like the foray of being a generalist. And so now when I solve problems as a strategist or what have you, I can think and sort of swap between the designer brain or the software brain or the marketer brain. And that's led itself to be really useful in a lot of situations.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me that you have a growth mindset, right? How the people talks about it. That's where the Professor Carol Dweck in Stanford said it about it. Right? That's amazing, and that's one of the skill every employer even looking into it. I think when you want to start any business, true. All right. So, what you do now in your day-to-day activities?
Yeah.
How you translate into from a technology working and a coding to do what type of and how you manage your business?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things about being a generalist is that you have a lot of things that you could do, but there's not everything that you should do. And so over the years, and if you think about my own journey of running this agency, a lot of it is actually understanding about how to lead and manage a team. So I've got all these technical skills, but now I find myself more often than not being in a coaching capacity of how do I nurture the rest of my team to be better at whichever areas that they're implementing on and making improvements. And I find that's sort of where the highest leverage of where I am. And so fortunately or unfortunately, I find myself actually in a lot more meetings than I used to be, where I'm just doing design reviews or for, let's say, ad creative campaigns that we're doing. I'm still the analyst on the team for managing campaigns. And so we work with clients. I'm often the person that's responsible for understanding how things are working, the intended usage, and then there's the actual performance and then making interpretations of that. Just because with data science, as you could appreciate, it's a lot of nuance between. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Turn it off. But there's a lot of nuance about interpreting data and a lot of misinterpretation. So I find that's a hard area that I still haven't had it off yet. But in terms of setting up design campaigns or landing page, setting design direction, setting strategy, and setting actual campaigns of how do we explore channels for whichever media campaigns that we're approaching, I'm finding myself being the decision maker for those type of things and guiding the rest of my team.
Okay. And if, as you said, that this was not as a planned journey, that's what you were trying to solve next thing.
Correct.
And now, so if I say today, so what you're trying to solve next?
That's an excellent question, because one of the things that I learned over the years running the consultancy is that the advantage of building an agency was that we have all these operations and processes that we became more efficient. We got to start a campaign and see it through to completion over and over again. But as a business model, it's really useful for extracting domain knowledge across organizations. I get to sample what a 8-figure SaaS company how they operate and see how that compares to a 6-figure sort of e-com startup. And so I get all these data points built in my head. And so where I'm finding myself wanting to apply that next is, if you have all these ability to grow companies and build these playbooks, it's best to learn how to apply it to yourself. And so right now we're building the agency, but 5 years from now, the end goal would be to build a venture holding company where we acquire and buy brands that we bring in-house to grow. And it's not a unheard of. There's other people that do the same thing. But I think we were doing this organically because when we're doing client intake, when we meet with new companies and new brands, and we're often asked, hey, what would you do here? I'm often finding myself thinking, what would we actually do? How would we grow this thing? And if we played it out, would it actually work? Which eventually kind of became sort of like an investment thesis of sorts. And so even as I talk about that's something that we're doing in 5 years, the groundwork that we're setting up today is we've been acquiring and working with small brands, sub 250K, to basically bring it in-house to understand e-com operations. One, it helps us build empathy for the clients that we serve. But on the other hand, it also helps us build sort of the muscles that we'll need 5 or 10 years from now, so that if we had, let's say, a larger investment pool to invest from, other from our own capital for investors, that we are more familiar with the M&A process and we're much better at deal sourcing and deal finding. So right now, 80% is still headspace is around growing companies and working with the brands that choose to work with us, that we get to be lucky to be partnered with. But the remaining 20% is looking ahead and understanding how do we transition ourselves into a holding company that, for all the people that we bring into our organization, we can transition them into business partners to work with us on all the different projects that we build out.
Right. Excellent. I think so. Okay. So now you're also running your business. So you're hunting talent, which you are bringing into either freelancers or maybe to your team. So maybe if this question is to help audiences, especially the technologists or who are in the early career or in mid career or senior career, what you see key characteristics when you hire or maybe you bring them on board in your organization, either a freelancer or either a full time. So what characteristics you see or you're targeting them?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that, because one of the lessons that I learned early on in my career was that when there was a CEO that I worked that I really respected, which was he talked about hiring designers, and the analogy they explained was that when you look at people's portfolio, when you do this hire designers, you look for people's portfolios. Sometimes what you got to watch out for is that if you see designers with mediocre portfolios, it doesn't actually mean that they're mediocre designers per se. It could actually be meaning that they're given mediocre opportunities. And so understanding the context of how people shaped their careers is very important when I think about people and hires. And so in the same way, when I think about myself and how I could be easily misinterpreted by other people during the hiring process, I try to think about where my misconceptions are when I bring on someone into my team. And so what that means is that when I look for interesting or useful hires or people that I really believe in, I generally think about where they are today, and I try to find out where they were 6 months ago, or to predict where they're going to be 6 months from now. And so it's no surprise, being someone that is very interested in growth, that I pay attention to the delta of how they approach problem solving, or what their interest in is bridging skill gaps. But I think that context is also appropriate for our company, because we're a relatively small company, right? If you're a company with a larger bankroll and you can make more sort of hiring mistakes or what have you, or leeway to do that, I should say, I think you may want to hire people that are proven to be with certain experts. And realistically, we're looking for people that are early in their careers to grow with us, as opposed to people that are, more established and with proven track records. So I think the delta and how I think about framing comes from a place of how do I have people that can grow, and that's why I look for those two things. And I think I'll give one more, which is I look for people that have undiscovered strengths. And what I mean by that is that those people, when they show up, let's say you're hiring for a marketer role or a copywriter role, their title is that they're a copywriter, or the title is that they're a designer. But what they actually bring to the table is their full self. And most people, if you dig into their history, you might learn that they're a musician. You might learn that they play chess. You might learn that they play video games. And what's interesting about people and what they're really passionate about is, if you ask those people that are passionate about those things, they often bring those parts of their work into the part of passion into the work. And so when you see someone that is that deep into any field, that's usually a good sign. When you see someone that's been a musician or a dancer or an artist or whatever for 10 or 15 years, I usually try to figure out, hey, how does that impact the way that you do copywriting? How does that impact the way you do software development? You usually find some really interesting insights, and you see that they'll surprise you at the workplace.
No, wonderful. I think that's a very, very good insights to look into it. All right. So now let's go to some business area. Now you support primarily e-commerce, and then even if a SaaS builder or a SaaS company they have. So if we see what are the common maybe mistakes or maybe common challenges you see in, we can start with maybe SaaS. If someone is
Sure.
building a SaaS, and usually, I mean, SaaS is either you get funding and then you're a technology guy yourself, or you are
Yeah.
pulling together 4 or 5 people and then you're starting from scratch and then you build an amazing product. But
Yes.
you're not there, you don't have customers, or maybe you're
Yes.
struggling on the customers and all that. So what type of you see the customers on which
Sure.
you're working?
Sure. So I like this one with SaaS companies because I think not enough people realize the particular nuance or challenge with marketing or growing a SaaS company. And the main one I think is that they get confused about their positioning, or they get confused about how they explain their service. So as an example, if you happen to be at a networking event and someone works at a SaaS company or they sell SaaS software, and you ask them, hey, what does your company do? You'll get a very direct and clear answer. Oh, our software does this for Y, or our product does this to solve this problem. They're very clear about it. And the reason why they do that in person is because if they don't explain the product or software in that way, historically, they've learned that people get confused. They'll ask follow-up questions and they'll hone the way that they explain the product or software. But here's where the mistake happens. You suddenly take that description and you go to the marketing site, they're completely different. They'll say completely different things on the marketing site. And oftentimes that's really what people are interacting and hearing and seeing for the first time. And so the gap is a lot of marketers and designers really just, or founders, just need to bring the thing that they say in person and put it on the marketing site so that whatever confusion or clarity that people would have would be exactly the same reading experience as someone get exposed to your product for the first time. And then you can figure out how to layer the different types of feature sets or many, and to show you differentiations. Those things often get lost, and it's true for established companies, but it's especially true for startups that are just starting out and not knowing how to explain the product or service. And so messaging and being clear about their messaging is often the first mistake that a lot of SaaS products and companies make. And so if I talk about on e-commerce side, the e-commerce side also has some of those challenges as well, although it's more of a different problem, because with SaaS products, if I said I have a product management software, or if I have a time tracking software, you kind of know what it is, but the difference is all around the nuance of those things. But if I showed you a physical product, like a pair of socks or a mattress, you don't have clarity problems. You now have a value of why is this product over better than the next problem. And so sometimes in the physical product, you don't have issues with getting sales. You have issues with trying to convince people that your product is worth more, or that your product is different than some other product in some way, shape, or form. And that the way that you introduce your product in that environment depends on whether if the physical product that you're selling is something that people can Google for, right? Because there's some products that there's a clear label, but there's other products that aren't so clear for how to Google for it. And that's when you think about but they're best introduced visually through something like a paid social campaign or a social ad, where you're not told what the product is, we're just shown what the product is and how it works. And so thinking about what your product, is it better to be shown, or is it something that people already know about? It's usually the first entry point. But then sometimes people get confused because they're just defaulting to, I'm on e-commerce store, well, I better be on Facebook, or Google ads don't work. And they just misinterpret the context of using the right tool for the right job. But it all starts with the category of like, how do you explain your product to someone, and how would they get to the point of, yeah, I should buy this? That's usually the mistake on this side of the world.
All right, and I think I kind of relate it because I had some experience. My younger brother, he started an online e-commerce type of these birthdays and celebration cakes.
Yes.
Okay, and he was a technology guy. He spent his life in early career. He said, "Okay, let me, pull up the chefs, and I'll put together, and I'll start from an e-commerce point of view." And it's as it's a food product. So, and I was trying to help him for this e-commerce, on the on the Shopify or WooCommerce site and all that. And we were not very clear enough to what messages need to pass, and then you need to search it, the photography and all that. And I can relate to the whoever is starting as an early, as a self business, and he want to do everything by himself. I think he struggled a lot, and I can kind of relate to that when the message which you were passing it very clear.
I'll add to that actually, because that's a very common scenario. And so I think what most people would benefit from understanding the role of marketing is that they actually, I think it helps them to think of marketing as sales at scale. Meaning that just because you're behind a screen or behind a landing page or behind an ad creative doesn't mean that you're lost from the core job of you have to sell people something. And so what that means is that if forget about the technology for a second, if you had a friend or someone that you're at a pop-up and you had to explain that product that you're selling to that person and say, hey, why you should buy this for $20 or $30, what have you, how would you explain it? And if you if you took the other person verbally through that journey and you hear all the objections and all the things, the trick is if you found someone that would have been the right person to buy it and you can't convince them, that's an issue. But if you knew what the talking points were and you're like, yeah, you totally need this because this solves your problem, it does this and it does this, and the person's like, oh, wow, I totally get it. All you have to do, again, same thing as a SaaS example, is take that offline process of sales and translate it into whatever you're doing online, so that if the user or the audience goes through the same mental journey of the buying process, right, they'll go through the other side, and now you could just replicate that however many times. So marketing is sales at scale. If you can solve one-to-one, you can solve one-to-many.
Right. So one more question leading to this SaaS. So what you're observing, is it SaaS industry is going more niche industry, or are we used to see last 10 years back that there was one product and that can cover a lot of industries or maybe a lot of domains? Okay, it can there's a product in SaaS that can cover maybe restaurants, that can cover even a construction site, or even maybe shops, and another one. So what you are observing, is it going on a more from an industry or a business specific, or still the generalists are there?
Yeah. I'll be wary about speaking to trends per se, just because I have a very limited view of the things that I'm able to observe in the role that I'm in. But broad directions about the types of products that I consume, from a consumer side, not from a consultant side, is that I think, or even as a business owner, I should say, is that I see a lot of products, especially with the advancement of AI, and also even a few years ago with the advancement of and proliferation of no-code tools, is that I think the bar and the layer of accessing high utility and services is being lowered to the point that you don't need a lot. You don't have to be a coder. You don't have to do to for example, a coder to be to do automations or to do scraping. And again, with AI tools, is that it's lowering the bar for how do you create sort of like decent copy, right? How do you do decent research? It's making those things a lot more accessible than what they used to be. And I think that's kind of the biggest things that we're seeing in terms of trends, in terms of softwares. And as a process that I'm applying within our organization, it's trying to figure out, hey, before we go build this thing manually, is there a product or tool that I can augment that process to make it more efficient, that I'm paying $20 an hour a month for, or $40 a month for, that would make that a lot efficient. So I'm seeing a lot more of that, and I think about that a lot more as we're growing the organization or working with different groups.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing this, I think, experience. Now, how with the generative AI and ChatGPT, and how it's impacting your as an agency business? Because now people started thinking, a layman or an early, okay, I can create a marketing content from the ChatGPT or a Bard, and I'm good at. So what you're seeing over the last 3-4 months?
For sure. The short answer is things have been fascinating since the accessibility of all these different tools. I think the biggest impact that we're seeing within our organization is that, again, I think of agencies as a collection of operating procedures that we've systemized and repeated over and over again. And so trying to find ways to use tools like ChatGPT or whatever and applying it to our organization, I think very broadly speaking, I think it reduces the cost so that we're either more efficient to do more with less, or we're able to do the same things that we're previously doing, but faster. And we do see that, and we do actively encourage our team members to experiment, to do those type of things. And so where I think where I think that impacts our organization and our business is that a lot of the things that we used to be able to do on our own, like writing messaging and copy or like ad creative or those type of things, I think those things are getting commoditized, which means both from a hiring perspective and from a nurturing perspective and from a training perspective, I think about all the areas that AI cannot easily reproduce, which is taste or insight or understanding context of situation. So I think of decision making in, especially in nuanced decisions. If I had an ad creative, if I were to do art, I can produce it very easily, but using the right sort of visuals in a certain time, that could be sort of different. And so we have experimented, for example, with creating ad creatives that are using generative images. But does that replace videos? We're not quite there yet, at least in terms of an advertising perspective. But in terms of messaging, testing copy, we stopped overthinking and we just basically threw it to the bot and basically trained ourselves to be better pickers of, hey, if there's 3 to 5 different options that come out, how do you tell which one is better and what are your reasons why? I think of those things as more important, because I think those things are, at least in the short term, not easily disrupted or replaced, whereas other things are commoditized.
All right. So we can fairly say that you are utilizing to enhance productivity rather than it's impacting as a business. Okay, I don't have a work for copywriting and all that. All right.
For sure.
Okay. So maybe one last question. What's one thing you wish that you know before starting, maybe when you are building a product, or maybe you're doing this growth agency? But I think it's more relevant to when you are building a product.
Yeah, between a product or an agency, I think it goes down to a similar sort of like core idea, which is, I think it's easy to, I think a lot of a common advice I try to give others, which I also try to give to myself, is I try to think about, why am I starting this particular business and why me? Right. And so I think of that now, I think of that as domain expertise. And so when you see a lot, again, being a consultant or an agency, we get to see samples of like why certain companies win. And one of the sort of key themes that I often see is that a founder wins because they know something that other people don't easily know. And so when you build the product, you're building that with insights and knowledge or experience that most other people are not easily accessible for. And so it's not so much about, oh, could I build this business? It's should I build this business? And so when I think of both for myself and for other people that I try to ask, if you were to build this thing out, would you be the right person for it? And it seems very limiting to do that, but I actually find that it's more freeing, because more often than not, especially if you're entrepreneurial or you're opportunistic, you have endless and boundless sets of ideas. And so for me, having that kind of mentality to think about, should I build this business? Because am I the right person for it? Do you have the right strengths or the domain expertise, or do I have insider knowledge or something that I could utilize or exploit? And not just do I have the technical skills for, or if I just have the ability to. I think if I add that criteria to the mix, it makes it a lot more easier for me to say no, or for me to say yes to something. That's what I think that I now wish I knew sooner. But I try to tell other people now that I come to that realization.
All right. Thank you so much for joining, John, Open Tech Talks. And if someone wants to reach you, where they should be heading to?
Yeah, I'm a lurker on Twitter, but you can find me at JTC Chan on I should say Twitter. It's X now, x.com. But that's one place to find me. I'm easily accessible. The other place is just to look us up on our marketing site. We're at 2x.agency. Or you can email me. I'm John, JOHN, at 2xcd.com. So the number 2, letter X, C, and D.com. And otherwise, thank you so much, Kashif, for having me. This was a very fun conversation.
Thank you so much for joining and sparing your time for us.
Thanks for listening to the OTech Talks podcast, and be part of Tech Talks at otechtalks.tv. It's a turf to share ideas, insights, and innovations.